answering my question or somebody else?
I'm
It's both the and he,
yes.
but when is it he? Alone? All alone? Is it just?
Sometimes it could be alone, yes.
'Cause
Okay,
B is
じゃあ
in-
皆さん聞いてください。The question was about the different readings of ni, nichi, the one that means sun. Depending on the context and the meaning being used, there's a slew of different pronunciations, as you may have noticed. When it's part of Nihon, it's ni, right? When it's a day of the week, like 15 nichi, the 15th of the month, it's nichi. When it's part of one of the dates that are numbers 1 through 10, it's actually totally irregular, and yet every one of those is sort of individual. When it's something like doyobi, Saturday, it's bi, right? And the question was, when is it he? And honestly, I guess it can be a he pronunciation sometimes when it's a standalone, like ano hi, that day.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
There are probably other examples of times when it's pronounced he that I'm not thinking of at the moment. But this is an example of multiple onyomi and multiple kunyomi for the same kanji. Remember, we talked about the fact that sometimes a particular kanji got adopted into Japanese more than once for different purposes, different meanings, different influences brought it into Japan at different times. And so different pronunciations came along with it depending on which pronunciation was dominant in China at the time. And in some cases also the meaning that it was being put toward within Japanese, because one can guess that even in ancient Japanese pre-written system, they might have had differing pronunciations for the word for sun, the word for day, and so forth. So even before Chinese influence, there may have been more than one word that had a related meaning that then came to be associated with the kanji nichi. And then those various different meanings and pronunciations all got attached to the same kanji. Okay.
Doesn't Taiyo mean?
Taiyo also means the sun, yes.
Wasn't there a different kanji for that?
Yes, it's actually two kanji.
Really?
Yeah.
What do they look like?
Tai and yo. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
Okay. So the Nietzsche is obviously an extreme example. Most of the other ones they're showing you, they're not showing you nearly as many different pronunciations possible. But in some cases, they're just not showing you all the pronunciations possible. They're only showing you the ones that are being taught right now. And some of them, like Mizu and Sui, Suiobi is Wednesday. Mizu by itself is water. And I can't think offhand of any other pronunciations that are normally associated with that particular kanji. But there are some kanji where they're just not listing all of the infinite possibilities because they're just more than they want to list in this book. Okay.
Is it important to know which is the kunyomi, which is the other one?
For now, it doesn't matter that much if you don't know which ones are kunyomi and which ones are onyomi.
Mm-hmm.
The reason they give you that information in the book is more for the future. It's somewhat FYI, and it's somewhat because going forward, once you're learning more advanced kanji, there will come a time when knowing the difference between the two and knowing how to judge whether something might be kunyomi or onyomi will help you in reading kanji within a passage, reading and looking at it and saying, okay, yeah, I know that because that is ben and that is kyo in their kunyomi, you put them together, they become benkyo, as opposed to looking at them and reading them as, what is it, like hataraku and tsuyoi, something like that. So that they're two completely different pronunciations when you give them their kunyomi. It's not hataraku, it's something else, but I know tsuyoi is one of them. And that's completely different from its onyomi reading, and it helps to know that sometimes. Okay, so that's why they're giving you the indication which one's onyomi, which one's kunyomi, but it doesn't always matter right now, because we're still in the early stages of kanji.
I had a question I wanted to ask last class, but it wasn't about kanji. It was the difference between ikimashita and itekimashita.
We are not learning the te forms yet.
Okay.
Yeah, any te imas structure is the equivalent of an ing in English. It's the doing form, the continuous tenses.
It was part of the homework, and I didn't know the difference between like I went to I went to the temple, but both were accurate when I was checking my answers.
Okay.
And I didn't know the
For
difference
now,
between
ikimashita.
Okay.
Yeah, for now, that's what you know.
That's what I went with. I just wanted
Yeah.
to make sure.
But yeah, you've encountered te forms in a few of the phrases that we memorized early on, like itekimasu,
Mhm. That's why it
iterashai.
confused me.
Yeah. Itekimasu is literally a combination of the verb iku, to go, and the verb kuru, to come. Okay? Because you're going to go and then come back. Right? Itekimasu. Okay? And that way of combining things is something that we're not actually going to work with at all until 6th chapter, the last chapter of this semester. We're going to start it, and then there'll be more of it the beginning of 2nd semester.
Okay.
So we will get there, at least part of it.
Sorry. I was curious. So I
Yeah.
was checking my answers, and it kept telling me itekimashita. I was like, no, I don't know that yet.
Yeah, so, yeah. So for now, you can just use whatever place ni ikimashita or e ikimashita
Okay.
to say I went there. You know, as opposed to was going or something, which is what that te form usually does.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Were there any questions about how to write any of the kanji? Did anybody want to break down the yo, for example?
That is a really annoying concept. I had to buy new pens to write that.
Because you need
It
to
was
find
it's so
yeah.
tiny.
So, yeah, obviously it starts with the nichi, that's the easy part, right?
Okay.
This part, a good way to remember what's up there is to think of it as katakana yo twice. Okay? And yeah, it's like a backwards E in English, but I like putting it in a more Japanese context wherever possible.
I just associate it with the square 3.
Okay. Then the other piece is one of those radicals that we had when we did the radical homework, the short-tailed bird, right? Yeah, so it's a combination of the person radical, right, the side version
Oh yeah,
of
it shows here on.
Jin. And then you've got the little dot here, and then I think they do it this way
Yeah.
in this textbook. I'm used to doing a different stroke order because I'm used to doing it the Chinese way, but
In the textbook, those lines touch.
oh, yeah.
Since
Oh, no, not that one, the
This
3 lines.
dot, the
Oh, that
Says
is
that.
too.
way.
in the text, it says the hito, then the top dash, then the
The
first
first
top,
line, and then
then
the vertical, that's what I did.
Okay.
Right, but the
Yeah.
inside lines
Connect
to.
Yes, in print font, these inside lines, all 4 of these would touch. in handwritten, people aren't necessarily quite that precise.
I'm
So,
trying to write.
yeah.
Annoyance.
Yeah, so, yeah, when you're writing it a little bit faster, you know.
Mine do not look neat when I'm writing it.
Something like that is kind of normal, you know, and of course, if you get somebody who really likes to write in cursive, you know, what they sometimes call a grass script.
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, it could become that scribble.
What in
Right?
the?
Is that legible?
Yeah, that's pretty normal.
Oh my god. No, that one's more legible than that one.
Yeah.
It
But
looks like
that would be considered legible by most native speakers, not necessarily neat,
It looks.
but readable.
It looks like a Roswell alien trying to say hello to a horse with weird decorations.
English literature.
Yeah, yeah,
I
I
can
mean,
read.
yeah, handwriting in English is the same thing. I mean, we run our lines together so
Yeah.
much. Some people's handwriting is harder to read, some people's is easier to read.
Yeah, my
You know.
fellow teacher, right?
Yeah.
I can
Yeah, some professors have terrible handwriting. A lot of doctors are known for terrible handwriting, in Japan too, I believe, as well as here. On the other hand, somebody like my mom who used to teach lower grades of elementary school, she's got beautiful handwriting to this day. She's retired, but she still has beautiful, perfect script when she writes by hand, and you never have a hard time reading her writing. But you know, the average English-speaking adult, when they're writing in cursive, their handwriting isn't particularly gorgeous, right? So the same thing's true for some Japanese people, although I've noticed that a lot of high school students, at least, seem to develop very neat handwriting in Japanese, probably because their teachers won't accept it if it's too messy. And so at least through high school and very often through college, most Japanese people seem to still have pretty nice handwriting. It tends to only start to deteriorate later after that when they're no longer being graded on their penmanship. But I've noticed that, you know, when I was there as a student, most of my peers had really pretty handwriting in Japanese, the native speaker kids, because if they turned it in too messy, they probably had some teachers that would just put a big F on it and hand it back. You know, not even try to read it if it was too messy. So that's a cultural thing to some degree also, that they put a higher value on neatness and have higher expectations of neatness than we tend to do here. I mean, here it's considered really like, oh my God, she's strict if you've got an English teacher who refuses to grade your paper because it's too messy. But in Japan, it's not as unusual.
I had a teacher like that in elementary school.
Yeah.
She called my mom and told her I needed to change my cursive handwriting. It was mean.
So, other than that, were there any kanji that anybody felt like they were confused about?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
The character for up points up, the character for down points down. The one for middle is cut in half right down the middle.
Yeah.
The kanji for fire is like written really pretentious in the book. Like they have it like
Yeah.
they
Okay. Yeah.
usually you just see like two
Usually
little lines.
for handwritten ka or karyobi, these two are kind of both slanted that way
Mhm.
usually, and then the middle looks like hito. That's a pretty typical. That's a pretty typical handwritten form for ka. There are a number of kanji where the calligraphy form and the print font are somewhat different from the handwritten style. Just like we found with hiragana and katakana, there were some things that you just can't reproduce easily if you're not using a calligraphy brush.
For today, are we gonna have to know, like, the time words on the page you gave us to read? 127. The day before yesterday, today, 2 weeks ago. We're gonna have to know those.
I'm trying to remember if those are even in here or not.
Yes, we do.
Those weren't kanji though, right?
They
No.
have kanji
They
underneath,
have
but we
kanji
don't know
there,
those
but-
kanji.
Right, no, if they're not kanji that are required for this chapter, then they're not likely to be on the kanji test, because the kanji
just wanted
test
to make
focus,
sure.
the kanji quiz focus is these specific
These ones.
kanji that are taught in this lesson,
Okay.
okay? And sometimes review ones,
Okay.
especially as they mesh. You know, so for example, if you have a kanji from a previous lesson and a kanji from this lesson that both would get used in a single phrase, then that phrase might come up. So something like Sanjihan, 3:30, is very likely to come up on a quiz for this lesson because that's a time phrase that you guys already know, and we just added one more kanji that you didn't already know from last chapter. So that kind of phrasing, and days of the week, the words for Japan and Japanese person, those are the kinds of things that are gonna come up on this quiz.
Are we going to have instances in this semester in the book? I haven't looked ahead too far in the book, but are we going to have new kanji that are the same as we've learned but with different meanings? Because I've noticed that happens with verbs. We get the same verb with different meanings.
I don't believe they repeat any of the kanji. What they sometimes do is they introduce a new context for a kanji that we've previously studied, and then they want you to then be able to use that kanji in context.
Okay.
So, for example, we've learned Nihon in this chapter. The go from Nihongo comes up later, but they are going to expect you to be able to put those together and write the whole phrase Nihongo in kanji once we learn the go. And then some other chapter teaches the A that's in eigo, and there again, they'll expect you to be able to make that connection and write eigo in kanji once we've learned both of the kanji involved.
Okay, because I looked at, the next chapter has yoku, and it's the same yoku but with a different meaning. And I was
Right.
wondering if they were going to do that with kanji, because I know they don't give us all the meanings of the kanji.
Right. Most of the time, when you look at the kanji on the page that introduces them, there's usually only one English translation given, but there are multiple readings given
Yeah.
and multiple examples of
Yeah.
usage of that kanji. Some of them are highlighted in gray, and some of them are not. The gray highlighted ones are the ones that you're expected to know as of this lesson.
Okay.
The ones that aren't highlighted are ones that they're giving you more context, but in addition, they may be ones that will come up in some future chapter
Okay.
where, you know, maybe there's a 3 kanji compound and they're showing it to you, but we've only learned one of those 3 kanji so far. And then the second one of that compound will come up later, and the third one will come up later yet. And so, once we've learned all 3, then they'll expect you to be able to read that whole word in
Okay.
kanji.
Just
No.
one.
Okay. Okay.
For this one,
Uh-huh.
does this one on this side ever kind of touch like a K almost?
That's the way it was
Not
written in the book,
usually.
Sometimes when you go to the book, you'll see that.
That's what
Yeah,
I was
it's usually like
fire.
close, but it's not usually actually touching.
Okay.
You know, if you looked at it under a microscope, you would see that it's not actually touching, it's just awfully close to touching.
What about the one for water?
Not touching.
Suyobi does sometimes touch, yeah.
Because it does look like a K from the other
Yeah.
side. Yeah.
That one, yeah, some people write it
Yeah.
where it's touching, some people write it with a little bit more of a gap,
Okay.
but,
Are both accurate?
yeah, that one's less strange if it touches. This one, I think, if you wrote it where the lines are a lot closer to the middle, that's okay, but if you wrote it where it's actually touching, I think that would look kind of odd. You know, I think people would still be able to read what you meant by it, but it would look a little funny. You know, think about, you know, if you're writing in English and you write your A like that, that's considered pretty normal. If you write it like that, that's like, huh, what happened to that person? You know? You know, so, yeah, so
It's
there,
like a CL.
yeah, in general, if something's got a gap, it's supposed to have a gap. If it's touching, it's supposed to touch, but sometimes the rules are a little bit gray, like if it's touching, there are some structures where it's really supposed to touch, and there's some structures where if it doesn't quite touch, but it's close to touching, that's good enough. And then there's some where it cuts through, and then it definitely has to cut all the way through if that's the case. So something like nakka, for example, you have to make sure that the line really goes all the way through top and bottom. For you to write it that way, that's a piece of a different kanji. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that even.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Also,
It doesn't work to not let it cut through if it's supposed to cut through.
I have a question about just two of the kanjis that only look alike. Hon, book, basis, and moku.
Hon and moku. Okay,
Yeah.
let's talk about hon and moku for just a second. Okay. There's only a one-line difference between the two, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So if you write moku first, okay, you can see, if you squint and look at it funny, you might be able to see the origins of it.
It's a tree.
It came from a picture of a tree where the top half is kind of like the branches and the bottom half is the roots. Okay? If you think of it in those terms as this means tree, then think about the abstract concept of origin. Okay? How do you draw a picture of origin? It's too abstract. You can't draw a picture of it, right? But what you can do is symbolize it. And so what this extra line symbolizes is the sun just coming up over the horizon, just the tiniest little bit, so it's just making a little red line instead of a full circle yet. And so that is the origin of the sun.
Oh, so that's
So
what
that's
it
where
means.
the origin meaning comes from. That's kind of the history of it. And then what you can do then is look at the whole thing as, it's not a picture of a tree with the sun coming up behind it. It's symbolizing origin. So although it is a tree with an extra line, that's not what it's meant to mean.
So that kanji is used in the Japan kanji, right?
Yes.
Is that
Yeah,
why?
well, if you take, and some people, instead of saying that that's the line, they might say that that's like the dirt that the tree grows up out of. That's the origin of the tree. That's another way you could explain it. I'm not sure which one's more historically accurate. I've had
I
it
like this
explained to
one
me
better.
both ways. But if you take this as the meaning of origin, okay, and then you take this as the meaning of sun, sun's origin, as in land of the rising sun. You've heard that term for Japan before, right?
Yeah.
And remember that this writing system came from China. From China's perspective, Japan is the land of the rising sun.
Yeah, because it's like
To
all the
us, it's the land of the setting sun, right? But from this perspective of standing on the eastern shore of China, you can't really see Japan, but if you know it's there, then you can think of the sun is coming from that direction, kind of.
but aren't the time zones different? And Japan is actually.
Oh yeah, Japan is far enough east, but that's not the point. The point is that from the perspective of the ancient Chinese people, who didn't know that the earth was actually revolving around the sun, they just knew that the sun came up in the east, they saw, oh, we thought this was just ocean out there, but no, we come to find out there's actually land over there, and there are people living there. Okay, we're going to call them the land of the rising sun.
Aren't the Ainu in Hokkaido technically the ancient and native
Well, they
Japanese?
were the original Japanese people, yeah. We don't really know for sure how long ago and from where the people we think of as Japanese came from, but we know that the Ainu were there before them. But we don't have any historical or factual evidence to prove exactly where the people of Japan came from, because it's all prehistoric.
We could just go on the Enterprise and go into a time double.
You wish. Okay, any other questions about any of them?
No, I'm good.
Okay, everybody else good?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Let me make sure I got it, please.
How many questions?